Captain Maria Vasquez felt the familiar rumble of her Warthog's engines as she carved through the narrow Nevada canyon, the red sandstone walls rising like ancient monuments on either side of her aircraft. The morning sun cast long shadows across the desert floor, and the air was already shimmering with heat that would become unbearable by noon. She had flown this route dozens of times over the past 6 months, but today, something felt different. The silence on her radio was too complete, too perfect, as if the entire world had been holding its breath. Her call sign was Ghost, a name that had followed her through 3 combat deployments and countless training missions. The irony wasn't lost on her that she flew an aircraft most pilots considered ugly and outdated, while her nickname suggested something ethereal and untouchable. But Maria loved her Warthog precisely because it was honest about what it was built for. While other pilots flew sleek fighters that looked like they belonged in science fiction movies, she flew a machine designed by people who understood that war was brutal, messy, and unforgiving. The canyon walls seemed to close in around her as she followed the predetermined flight path, her instruments reading normal despite the growing unease in her chest. This was supposed to be a routine training exercise, part of a classified program called Ghost Protocol that prepared pilots for unconventional combat scenarios. The briefings had been vague, filled with technical jargon about advanced reconnaissance techniques and quantum-level awareness training. Most of it had sounded like science fiction, but the pay grade increase and security clearance upgrade had been real enough. Maria's hands moved automatically across her controls, adjusting for thermal updrafts and wind shear with the unconscious competence of someone who had been flying combat aircraft for over a decade. She had started her career on transport planes, hauling supplies and personnel across hostile territory, but something about the Warthog had called to her. Maybe it was the way it could take punishment and keep flying, or the devastating precision of its 30mm cannon. Whatever the reason, she had never regretted the transfer to attack aircraft. The radio crackled suddenly, breaking the desert silence with a burst of static that made her jump. For a moment, she thought her handler was finally going to break. Radio silence with new instructions, but the transmission dissolved into electronic noise before any words became clear. She checked her communication equipment, running through the standard troubleshooting procedures, but everything appeared to be functioning normally. The silence returned, more oppressive than before. Something was wrong. The feeling had been growing stronger with each training mission, a nagging sense that she was being watched, studied, evaluated for purposes beyond her understanding. The other pilots in the program had mentioned similar experiences, but their conversations always seemed to die out when supervisors approached. There were too many classified briefings, too many psychological evaluations, too many questions about her family history and personal relationships. The canyon began to widen ahead, revealing a vista of endless desert broken by mesas and dry lake beds that looked like scars on the ancient landscape. According to her mission parameters, she should be approaching the target area soon, a mock enemy installation where she would practice precision strikes against simulated threats. But as she scanned the horizon through her canopy, she saw nothing but empty wastelands stretching to the distant mountains. That's when her radar warning system exploded into urgent electronic screaming. Maria's training kicked in instantly, her eyes snapping to her instruments as threat indicators painted her display with angry red symbols. 2 aircraft were approaching fast from above, diving out of the sun with the kind of precision that spoke of experienced pilots and hostile intent. Her hands moved to her defensive systems, but before she could react, 2 sleek fighters dropped from the clouds like hunting hawks, their afterburners glowing like angry eyes as they took positions on either side of her Warthog, F-16 fighting Falcons, American aircraft flown by American pilots who were treating her like an enemy combatant. The radio crackled with a voice she didn't recognize. Cold and professional, with the kind of authority that brooked no argument. Unknown aircraft at your current position. You are in violation of classified airspace. Follow us immediately, or we will engage. Maria's blood turned to ice water in her veins. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, flying a mission that had been planned and approved by people with security clearances higher than her own. But these pilots were treating her like a hostile intruder. Their weapon systems undoubtedly locked onto her aircraft as they waited for her response. The canyon walls that had seemed protective moments before now felt like a trap, too narrow for evasive maneuvers and too confined for escape. She keyed her radio, choosing her words carefully. This is Warthog 77. I am on authorized training mission. Request you verify with command before taking action. The response came immediately, sharp with impatience. Negative, Warthog 77. No training missions authorized in this sector. You will follow us to designated landing site immediately. Maria felt her world tilting on its axis. Someone had made a mistake, but the question was whether it was her commanders who had sent her into the wrong airspace, or these intercept pilots who didn't understand the classified nature of her mission. Either way, she was trapped between opposing forces with no way to prove her legitimacy without compromising the very secrecy that protected her operation. The lead fighter moved closer, close enough that she could see the pilot's helmet turning toward her, studying her aircraft with the kind of professional assessment that preceded either escort duty or an attack run. Behind her faceplate, Maria made a decision that would change everything. She would comply with their demands and hope that someone in the chain of command could sort out the confusion before her mission was completely blown. But as she banked toward the heading they provided, following the fighters toward an unknown destination, she couldn't shake the feeling that this forced landing was exactly what someone had been planning all along. The desert stretched endlessly below them, its surface broken by shadows that moved like living things across the ancient stone. Maria's instruments showed nothing but wasteland ahead, but she trusted that these pilots knew where they were taking her. What choice did she have? The alternative was being shot down by her own military, a fate that seemed impossible just hours ago, but now felt terrifyingly real. As they flew deeper into restricted airspace that wasn't supposed to exist, Maria began to wonder if she had stumbled into something far more dangerous than a simple training exercise. The pieces didn't fit together properly, and in her experience, that usually meant someone was lying about something important. The question was who and what they were trying to hide. The F-16 pilots guided Maria toward what appeared to be empty desert, their formation perfect, despite the growing turbulence as the morning sun heated the barren landscape below. She had studied satellite imagery of this region extensively during her mission preparation, and she was absolutely certain that no airfield existed anywhere within 50 miles of their current position. Yet the lead pilot's voice came through her headset with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where they were going. Warthog 77, turn to heading 270 and begin descent. Landing site is 15 miles ahead. Maria's instruments showed nothing but open desert at that bearing, but she complied with the instruction while her mind raced through possibilities. Military bases didn't just appear out of nowhere, especially not in classified airspace that was supposed to be under the control of her own command structure. Someone was operating a facility that didn't officially exist, and they had just forced her to become an uninvited guest. The runway materialized from the desert heat shimmer like something out of a mirage, its black asphalt perfectly maintained despite its apparent isolation. Maria felt her stomach clench as she realized the implications of what she was seeing. This wasn't just a landing strip. The construction was too sophisticated, too recent, and far too large for any legitimate training operation she knew about. Whoever had built this facility had resources that rivaled major military installations, As her landing gear touched the scorching tarmac, Maria felt the familiar jolt of touchdown. But nothing about this situation felt familiar anymore. The runway stretched nearly 2 miles into the distance, long enough to handle cargo aircraft. Or bombers, not just the fighters and attack planes that dominated this region's airspace. Fresh concrete barriers lined the approach, and the control tower looked like it had been assembled from prefabricated sections. Its windows tinted so dark, they resembled empty eye sockets watching her arrival. Black SUVs appeared before her. Engines had even begun to wind down, racing across the desert floor with military precision that spoke of extensive planning and coordination. These weren't security guards responding to an unexpected intrusion. They were a team executing a predetermined operation, and Maria was beginning to suspect that she hadn't stumbled into this situation by accident. A radio erupted with encrypted chatter using codes she didn't recognize despite her high-level security clearance. Fragments of conversation leaked through the electronic noise. Package secured. Initiate Protocol 7. Confirm identity before approach. The voices were calm and professional, speaking in the clipped tones of operators who had performed this routine many times before. Maria began her shutdown procedures while cataloging every detail of her surroundings, her training automatically, shifting into survival mode. The bunkers that had disgorged the armed personnel were cleverly concealed, their entrances disguised as natural rock formations, until camouflage doors had opened to reveal sophisticated facilities hidden beneath. The desert floor. This wasn't just a landing strip. It was a full military installation, complete with underground hangars and what appeared to be permanent living quarters. The armed personnel moved with the fluid coordination of special operations forces. There, lacked tactical gear unmarked, except for small communication devices clipped to their shoulders. Each carried weapons she recognized: carbines with advanced optics, sidearms and quick-draw holsters, and equipment that suggested they were prepared for anything from simple detention to full-scale combat. Their positioning was textbook professional, establishing overlapping fields of fire that would make any escape attempt suicidal. Movement on nearby rooftops caught her attention as snipers took positions, their rifle barrels glinting in the sunlight as they established coverage of the landing area. No matter which direction she might try to run, she would be in someone's crosshairs. These weren't soldiers playing at security. They were professionals who understood that even a grounded pilot could be dangerous if properly motivated. The lead of a 16 had landed behind her, its pilot already climbing down from his cockpit with practiced efficiency. His wingman circled overhead, maintaining overwatch in case the situation required additional firepower. Maria could hear the distinctive whine of the fighter's engine as it held a defensive pattern, ready to engage if she somehow managed to get her Warthog airborne again. A figure emerged from the largest of the black SUVs, and even at a distance, Maria could tell this person was in charge. The way other personnel oriented themselves around him, the deliberate pace of his approach, and the fact that he wore a business suit instead of tactical gear all marked him as someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. His confidence was the kind that came from years of commanding dangerous operations where failure meant more than just career disappointment. Her hands moved automatically through the post-flight checklist, but her mind was racing through scenarios that grew more disturbing with each passing moment. This level of response suggested either she had stumbled into something far more sensitive than a simple training exercise, or someone had been expecting her arrival. The timing was too perfect, the coordination too smooth for this to be an improvised response to an airspace violation. The radio crackled again, this time with a transmission directed specifically at her. Warthog 77, remain in your aircraft until instructed otherwise. Do not attempt to exit your cockpit. Compliance is mandatory. The voice was different from the F-16 pilot, older and more authoritative, with the kind of gravitas that came from years of commanding operations where lives hung in the balance of split-second decisions. Maria keyed her radio one last time, hoping to reach her handler or anyone in her chain of command who might explain what was happening. Control, this is Warthog 77 requesting immediate clarification of current situation. I am on authorized training mission and require assistance too. The transmission was cut off mid-sentence, a radio going dead with an electronic squeal that suggested active jamming. Someone had just severed her only link to the outside world, isolating her completely in this desert facility that didn't officially exist. As the suited figure approached her aircraft, flanked by armed guards whose weapons remained ready but not threatening, Maria realized that whatever was about to happen had been planned long before she had taken off that morning. The question was whether she was a target or an asset, whether this was an elaborate test or something far more sinister. Either way, she was completely alone, surrounded by forces whose intentions remained hidden behind professional masks and classified protocols that seemed to operate by rules she had never been taught. The heat was becoming unbearable inside her cockpit, but she didn't dare move until given permission. Sweat ran down her back beneath her flight suit, and her mouth felt like sandpaper. But more than physical discomfort, she felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her like a physical force. Everything she thought she knew about her mission, her command structure, even her own identity as a pilot seemed to be dissolving in the desert heat. The man in the suit stopped directly beneath her cockpit and looked up at her with eyes that revealed nothing. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly across the tarmac, despite the desert wind. "Captain Vasquez, welcome to your debriefing." As Maria climbed down from her cockpit, the desert heat hit her like a physical blow, her flight suit immediately beginning to stick to her skin in the oppressive afternoon sun. The tarmac radiated waves of heat that made the air shimmer and dance, distorting the figures approaching her aircraft. She had expected interrogation, detention, perhaps even arrest for violating airspace she wasn't supposed to know existed. What she hadn't expected was the sudden, electric silence that fell over the entire facility the moment the lead F-16 pilot got close enough to read the faded numbers painted on her Warthog's tail. The pilot had been moving with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to taking charge of difficult situations. Colonel Jake Morrison, according to the name tape on his flight suit, was a career fighter pilot with the weathered face and intense focus that marked combat veterans. His shoulders were squared, his head held high with military bearing that spoke of confidence earned through years of life-and-death decisions at 30,000 feet. But when his eyes focused on those 6 faded digits painted on her aircraft's fuselage, AF810965, everything changed. The transformation was so sudden and complete that Maria initially thought he might be having some kind of medical emergency. His confident stride faltered, then stopped entirely, as if an invisible barrier had materialized in front of him. His hands, which had been gesturing to his ground crew, froze in mid-motion. The helmet slipped from his fingers with what seemed like slow-motion inevitability. The expensive piece of equipment hitting the concrete with a sharp crack that echoed across the suddenly silent tarmac. The sound seemed to break some kind of spell, because suddenly everyone was moving again, but their movements were uncertain, confused, as if the script they had been following had suddenly been torn up and thrown away. Maria watched in growing bewilderment as the second F-16 pilot, who had been approaching from her left flank, came to an equally abrupt halt. Captain Tommy Rodriguez was younger, with the lean build and quick movements of someone still early in his career, but his reaction was identical to his squadron leader's. His face went pale beneath his helmet, and his mouth opened and closed several times without producing any sound. The armed personnel, who had been maintaining a professional perimeter around her aircraft, began to lower their weapons, not in surrender, but in confusion. Maria could see them exchanging glances, their body language shifting from alert readiness to uncertain hesitation. Whatever they had been briefed to expect, this wasn't it. The snipers on the rooftops remained in position, but she could see them adjusting their scopes, trying to get a better view of what was happening on the tarmac below. The man in the suit, who had been approaching with such authority just moments before, had stopped 20 feet away and was speaking rapidly into a satellite phone. Maria couldn't hear his words over the distance and the desert wind, but his body language suggested he was asking for instructions, possibly even requesting confirmation of something he couldn't quite believe. "Jesus Christ," Colonel Morrison finally whispered, his voice barely audible but carrying clearly in the sudden stillness. "It's really her number." His hands were shaking as he reached toward the painted digits, stopping just short of touching them as if they might burn his fingers. How is this possible? Captain Rodriguez found his voice next, though it came out as a croak. "Sir, that's the ghost bird. But she's—" He couldn't seem to finish the sentence, his eyes darting between Maria's face and the tail number, as if trying to reconcile two impossible realities. Maria felt a chill run down her spine despite the desert heat. The way they were looking at her, the way they had reacted to her aircraft's identification number. It was as if they were seeing something that shouldn't exist. She had flown this particular warthog for over a year, had grown accustomed to its quirks and characteristics, had never given much thought to its history beyond standard maintenance records. But clearly, these pilots knew something about her aircraft that she didn't. "I don't understand," Maria said, her voice steady despite the growing unease in her chest. "What's wrong with my tail number? Why are you looking at me like that?" "Colonel." Morrison's eyes snapped to her face, studying her features with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. He was looking at her as if he was trying to memorize every detail, as if he was afraid she might disappear if he looked away. "Your name," he said urgently. "What's your name?" "Captain Maria Vasquez, call sign Ghost," she replied automatically, then immediately regretted revealing her call sign. But the damage was done, and the effect of her words was immediate and dramatic. Captain Rodriguez actually staggered backward, his hand reaching out to steady himself against the nearest vehicle. "No," he said, shaking his head violently. "No, that's not possible. Ghost is dead. We were at her funeral. We saw the wreckage photos." The armed personnel were now openly staring, their professional composure cracking as they tried to process what they were hearing. Maria could see some of them reaching for their communication devices, probably trying to contact their superiors for guidance on a situation that clearly wasn't covered in their standard operating procedures. The man in the suit had finished his phone call and was approaching again, but his confident demeanor had been replaced by something that looked almost like fear. When he spoke, his voice carried a tremor that hadn't been there before. "Captain Vasquez, I need you to tell me exactly where you've been for the past 3 years. Every mission, every assignment, every day. Because according to our records, you died in Syria in 2022, and that aircraft was destroyed with you." Maria felt the world tilt slightly on its axis. The desert heat, the staring faces, the impossible words, it all combined to create a surreal tableau that felt more like a fever dream than reality. She opened her mouth to respond, to explain that there had obviously been some kind of mistake, but no words came out. Because somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice was whispering that maybe, just maybe, these people weren't wrong about everything. Colonel Morrison was still staring at her tail number, his lips moving silently as if he was reciting something from memory. When he looked up at her again, his eyes were filled with something that looked like reverence mixed with terror. "You saved our lives," he said quietly. 3 years ago in Syria, you came out of nowhere and saved our entire squadron. But you were supposed to have died doing it." The words seemed to unlock something in Maria's memory, fragments of images that felt more like dreams than recollections. She could almost see it. A different desert, different enemies. The satisfying vibration of her cannon as it destroyed targets that threatened American lives. But that was impossible. She had never been to Syria, had never flown combat missions outside of training exercises. Yet as she looked at the faces around her, at the mixture of awe and terror in their expressions, she began to suspect that impossible might not mean what she thought it did. "Tell me about Syria," she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the desert wind. "Tell me what happened to Ghost." "You're supposed to be dead," whispered Colonel Morrison, his voice barely audible above the desert wind. The words hung in the superheated air like a physical presence, each syllable carrying the weight of impossibility. His face had gone ashen beneath his tan, and Maria could see a fine tremor in his hands as he struggled to reconcile what he was seeing with what he knew to be absolutely true. Captain Rodriguez had removed his helmet entirely, revealing sweat-dampened hair and eyes that darted between Maria and the tail number, as if he was watching a magic trick he couldn't figure out. The younger pilot's breathing had become shallow and rapid, the kind of hyperventilation that preceded panic attacks in combat situations. "Syria," Morrison continued, his voice gaining strength as the memories flooded back. "March 15th, 2022. Operation Desert Falcon. We were providing close air support for a special operations team extracting a high-value target from a compound near Aleppo." His eyes grew distant, seeing not the Nevada desert but a war-torn landscape half a world away. Maria felt her breath catch in her throat. She remembered that date, remembered that mission, but not the way Morrison was describing it. In her memory, it had been a routine training exercise in the Nevada desert, practicing close air support techniques against simulated targets. But as Morrison continued speaking, fragments of something else began to surface in her mind. Flashes of images that didn't quite fit with her official mission records. "The intel was wrong," Morrison said, his voice taking on the mechanical quality of someone reciting a traumatic memory. "It was a trap. They had surface-to-air missiles, anti-aircraft guns, the whole package waiting for us. My wingman took a hit first. Sam caught him right in the engine. I watched him punch out, watched his chute deploy, but he was coming down, right in the middle of a hostile zone. The man in the suit had approached close enough to hear the conversation, and Maria could see him taking notes on a small tablet, his fingers moving rapidly across the screen. Other personnel were gathering around, drawn by the impossible nature of what they were witnessing. The snipers had abandoned their overwatch positions and were climbing down from the rooftops, their curiosity overcoming their tactical discipline. The special ops team was pinned down, Morrison continued, taking heavy fire from 3 directions. We had maybe 10 minutes before enemy reinforcements arrived, and no way to provide effective cover with the air defenses they had set up. That's when you appeared." He pointed at Maria's warthog with a hand that still trembled slightly. "Came in low from the east, using a sandstorm as cover. We couldn't see you on radar until you were practically on top of the target. You're first. Pass took out their primary SAM site with precision it was like watching an artist work. 30mm cannon fire so accurate, it looked like you were drawing lines on the ground." Maria's head was spinning. She could almost see it, the brown landscape rushing past beneath her aircraft. The satisfying vibration of the GAU-8 cannon as it spat depleted uranium rounds at enemy positions. But that was impossible. She had never been to Syria, had never flown combat missions in the Middle East. Her service record was clear. Training missions, exercises, domestic assignments only. "The second pass," Morrison continued, his voice growing more animated as he relived the memory. You came in from the south and took out their entire motor pool. 12 vehicles gone in 30 seconds. But they had you bracketed by then. I could see the tracers converging on your position, could hear the SAM lock warnings over the radio. You should have pulled out, should have climbed for altitude and gotten clear. Captain Rodriguez stepped forward, his voice filled with awe. But you didn't. You stayed low, kept making attack runs until every threat was neutralized. You gave. Used the opening we needed to extract our people and get my squadron leader's wingman to safety. Maria's hands were shaking now, and she clasped them behind her back to hide the tremor. The images in her mind were becoming clearer, more detailed. She could remember the taste of adrenaline, the weight of her helmet, the way her aircraft had shuddered under enemy fire. But how could she remember something that had never happened? "The last transmission we heard from you," Morrison said. Quietly, was package delivered. "Good hunting." Then your transponder went dark. Search and rescue found wreckage scattered across 15 square miles of desert. The aircraft was completely destroyed, burned so badly that ... He paused, swallowing hard. They never found enough remains to fill a coffin. We buried an empty box at Arlington. The man in the suit looked up from his tablet, his expression grim. "Colonel Morrison, I need you to be very specific about the timeline. What time did this engagement occur?" Morrison checked his watch, a gesture that seemed automatic despite the fact that they were discussing events from 3 years ago. "Local time, approximately 14:30 hours. The entire engagement lasted maybe 20 minutes from first contact to when Ghost went down." Maria felt the blood drain from her face. At 14:30 hours on March 15th, 2022, she had been flying a training mission in Nevada. She remembered it clearly because it had been her birthday, and she had been annoyed about having to work instead of celebrating. But the mission had been routine, uneventful, nothing like the combat scenario Morrison was describing. "There's something else," Rodriguez said hesitantly. "Something we never reported in our official debriefing." He glanced at Morrison, who nodded grimly. "During the engagement, we tried to raise you on the radio multiple times. You never responded to our calls, never acknowledged our presence. It was like you were flying a completely different mission, like you couldn't hear us at all." The pieces of an impossible puzzle were starting to come together in Maria's mind, forming a picture that defied everything she thought she knew about reality. She had been in 2 places at once, flying 2 different missions simultaneously, living 2 different versions of the same day. In one version, she had completed a routine training exercise and returned safely to base. In the other, she had died a hero's death in the Syrian desert, saving the lives of men she had never met. "The memorial service," Morrison said softly, "was 3 weeks later, full military honors. Your parents were there, your squadron mates, everyone whose life you had touched during your career. The chaplain read from your service record, talked about your dedication, your courage. They presented the flag to your mother." Maria's knees nearly buckled. She remembered her mother calling her that day, crying about something she couldn't quite explain, talking about dreams and premonitions and a feeling that something terrible had happened. Maria had dismissed it as maternal worry, had assured her mother that she was fine, that nothing was wrong. But now she wondered if, somehow, on some level, her mother had known the truth about what had happened in a desert on the other side of the world. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the desert wind and the distant sound of jet engines overhead. Maria tried to process what she was hearing, but it was like trying to solve a puzzle with pieces that didn't fit together in any rational way. She was alive, standing here in the Nevada desert, breathing and thinking and feeling the heat on her skin. But according to these men, according to official records, according to the evidence of wreckage and witness testimony, She had died 3 years ago in a place she had never been. "I need to sit down," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. Above the wind, the world seemed to be tilting around her, reality shifting like sand in a storm. Whatever was happening to her, whatever impossible truth was being revealed, she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The man in the suit stepped forward, his expression a mixture of concern and clinical interest. "Captain Vasquez," he said gently, "I think it's time we told you the truth about Project Looking Glass." Director Samuel Hayes of the Defense Intelligence Agency stepped forward, his tablet forgotten as he studied Maria's face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle that had been haunting him for years. The desert sun beat down mercilessly, but inside Maria felt cold, her mind racing through implications that seemed to multiply with each passing second. "Captain Vasquez," Hayes said slowly, "what I'm about to tell you is going to sound impossible, but I need you to listen carefully and try to remember." The faces around her, Morrison, Rodriguez, the armed personnel, even the snipers who had abandoned their posts, all wore expressions of people witnessing something that challenged their understanding of reality itself. 3 years ago, you volunteered for an experimental program called Project Looking Glass. The official designation was Advanced Temporal Reconnaissance, but the people who worked on it called it something else entirely. He paused, watching her face for any sign of recognition. "They called it the Ghost Protocol." The words hit Maria like a physical blow. Ghost Protocol. The same designation as her training route. The same name that had been whispered and classified. Briefings she couldn't quite remember. Fragments of memory began surfacing, like pieces of a shattered mirror reflecting distorted images of a past she had somehow forgotten. The technology was theoretical, Hayes explained, his voice taking on the careful tone of someone explaining something he didn't fully understand himself. Quantum entanglement applied to consciousness, the ability to project a pilot's awareness across space and time while their physical body remained safely in a controlled environment. The idea was to conduct reconnaissance missions in hostile territory without risking actual personnel. Morrison stepped closer, his face a mask of confusion and growing anger. "Are you telling me that the pilot who saved my squadron, who died protecting my people, was some kind of, a projection?" "Not a projection," Hayes said quickly. "The consciousness was real. The actions were real. The aircraft was real. But the pilot's physical body was here in Nevada, flying a training mission, while her consciousness was simultaneously operating an identical aircraft in Syria. The quantum entanglement allowed for perfect synchronization between the two states of existence." Maria's legs gave out, and she found herself sitting heavily on the hot tarmac, her mind reeling as suppressed memories began flooding back. She remembered the briefings now, the medical examinations, the psychological evaluations. She remembered signing documents so classified that even reading them required special clearance. Most of all, she remembered the machine, a complex array of sensors and neural interfaces that had been installed in a specially modified Warthog. "The mission in Syria was supposed to be a test," Hayes continued, crouching down beside Maria. "A simple reconnaissance flight to prove the technology worked. But when Morrison's squadron ran into trouble, the quantum-linked aircraft responded automatically to the emergency. Your consciousness, operating in both places simultaneously, made the decision to engage." Rodriguez was shaking his head violently. "This is insane. You're talking about science fiction. People can't be in two places at once." "The quantum mechanics are beyond my understanding," Hayes admitted. But the results were undeniable. The aircraft in Syria performed exactly as if it were being piloted by an experienced combat veteran. Every maneuver, every targeting decision, every tactical choice was perfect, because it was being flown by Captain Vasquez, even though she was physically 3,000 miles away. Maria looked up at her warthog, seeing it with new eyes. The battle scars she had attributed to training exercises took on new meaning. The faded paint, the small dents and scratches, the way certain systems seemed to respond to her touch as if they remembered her, it all made sense now. This wasn't just her aircraft. It was the quantum twin of the machine that had died in Syria. What happened to the other aircraft? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Hayes's expression grew grim. When the Syrian aircraft was destroyed, the quantum link was severed violently. The shock should have killed you, or at least left you in a permanent coma. Instead, your consciousness somehow absorbed the experiences of both aircraft, creating a hybrid memory that your mind couldn't fully process. The military psychologists called it quantum dissociation, your brain protecting itself by suppressing the memories of the mission that officially never happened. Morrison was staring at Maria with a mixture of awe and horror. So, when we attended your funeral, when we saluted your empty coffin, you were mourning a part of her that really did die, Hayes confirmed. The quantum-linked consciousness that operated the Syrian aircraft was destroyed along with the physical machine. What survived was the original Maria Vasquez, but with fragmented memories of experiences that belonged to her quantum twin. The pieces were falling into place now, creating a picture that was both impossible and undeniably true. Maria remembered the dreams that had plagued her for 3 years. Dreams of combat, of enemy fire, of dying in a foreign desert. She had attributed them to stress, to the normal anxieties of a military pilot, but they hadn't been dreams at all. They had been memories of a death she had experienced but somehow survived. The program was shut down immediately after Syria, Hayes continued. The technology was deemed too dangerous, too unpredictable. But you were already deep undercover on a related project, using your unique quantum-altered consciousness to infiltrate enemy networks in ways that conventional intelligence couldn't match. For 3 years, you've been living a double life, carrying out missions you couldn't remember, serving your country in ways that officially never happened. Rodriguez looked around at the assembled personnel, the hidden facility, the sophisticated equipment that surrounded them. And this place? This is where it ends, Hayes said simply. Where Captain Vasquez finally comes home from a war that the rest of the world will never know she fought. The quantum alterations to her consciousness are breaking down. The memories are surfacing. The two versions of her reality are beginning to merge. She needs medical attention, psychological support, and most importantly, she needs to know the truth about what she sacrificed for her country. Maria stood slowly, her legs still unsteady but her mind beginning to clear. She looked at Morrison and Rodriguez, these men whose lives she had saved without even knowing it, and felt a strange sense of completion. The nightmares, the fragmented memories, the feeling that she was living someone else's life, it all made sense now. The war she couldn't remember was finally coming to an end. But as she looked around at the faces surrounding her, at the complex facility that had been built to handle situations like hers, she realized that the real war was just beginning. The war between what she had been and what she was becoming. Between the pilot she remembered being and the quantum-enhanced consciousness she was still discovering. There's one more thing, Hayes said quietly, his voice barely audible above the desert wind. The quantum entanglement process is irreversible. You're not the same person who volunteered for Project Looking Glass 3 years ago. You never will be again. The question now is what we do with what you've become. Maria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert evening. She was still herself, still the pilot who had chosen service over personal safety, still the woman who valued loyalty and courage above all else. But she was also something more now, something that existed partially outside the normal boundaries of space and time. The question wasn't what they would do with what she had become. The question was what she would do with the power she was only beginning to understand. The tail number, Maria said suddenly, the final piece of the puzzle, clicking into place with crystalline clarity. AF 810965. It wasn't transferred to honor my sacrifice. It was transferred because this aircraft is quantum linked to the one that was destroyed. They're the same machine, existing in two states simultaneously. Hayes nodded grimly, his expression confirming what Maria had just realized. The quantum signature is permanent. This aircraft will always carry the echo of its twin, just as you will always carry the memories of both versions of yourself. The question now is what we do with that knowledge. Morrison stepped forward and extended his hand, his earlier shock replaced by something that looked like profound respect. What we do, he said firmly, is make sure that Captain Maria Ghost Vasquez gets the recognition she deserves. Both versions of her, the one who died saving my squadron and the one who lived to continue serving her country in ways we're only beginning to understand. As Maria shook his hand, she felt the weight of 3 years of confusion and fragmented memories finally beginning to lift. The handshake was firm, genuine, the grip of one warrior acknowledging another. But more than that, it was the first human contact she'd had in months that felt completely real, completely honest, free from the layers of deception and classified protocols that had defined her existence. There's something else you need to understand, Hayes said, consulting his tablet again. The quantum entanglement process didn't just link your consciousness to the Syrian aircraft. It created a permanent connection between you and this machine. Every flight you've taken over the past 3 years, every training mission, every routine patrol, they've all been contributing data to a program that's been studying the long-term effects of quantum consciousness integration. Rodriguez whistled low under his breath. You mean she's been a test subject this whole time? Flying missions while they studied her brain? Not exactly, Hayes replied. The missions were real. The training was legitimate. But yes, every flight has been monitored, every neural response recorded and analyzed. The military wanted to understand whether the quantum alterations were stable, whether they could be replicated, whether Captain Vasquez represented the future of aerial combat or a dangerous anomaly that needed to be contained. Maria felt a surge of anger that surprised her with its intensity. Contained? Is that what this is? Some kind of quarantine? Originally, yes, Hayes admitted. The Joint Chiefs were terrified of what you represented. A pilot who could apparently exist in multiple locations simultaneously, who carried memories of classified operations that officially never happened, who demonstrated capabilities that defied conventional understanding of human consciousness. There were serious discussions about permanent isolation, about treating you as a security risk too dangerous to remain active. The armed personnel around them were listening intently now, their professional detachment cracking as they realized they were witnessing something unprecedented in military history. Maria could see some of them exchanging glances, probably wondering if they were part of some elaborate psychological experiment, or if they were actually standing in the presence of something that challenged the fundamental laws of physics. But the data proved them wrong, Hayes continued. Your performance over the past 3 years has been exemplary. Better than exemplary, actually. Your tactical awareness, your precision, your ability to anticipate threats and respond to emergencies. It's all been enhanced by the quantum integration. You've become something new, Captain Vasquez. Something that could revolutionize how we think about human potential in combat situations. Morrison was studying Maria's face with new understanding. The way you saved us in Syria. The precision. The tactical awareness. The way you seemed to know exactly where to strike for maximum effect. That wasn't just training, was it? You were processing information at a quantum level, seeing patterns and possibilities that normal human consciousness couldn't detect. I don't know, Maria said honestly. I remember fragments, flashes of awareness that felt like they were coming from outside my normal consciousness. During combat situations, it was as if I could see the entire battlefield from multiple perspectives. Simultaneously, could anticipate enemy movements before they happened. Hayes pulled up a video file on his tablet, holding it so Maria could see the screen. This is helmet camera footage from one of your recent training exercises. Watch your targeting solution on this mock SAM site. Maria watched herself flying. The attack run, but what she saw on the screen didn't match her memory of the event. On the video, her aircraft moved with impossible precision, adjusting course and altitude with micro-corrections that no human pilot should have been able to calculate in real time. The targeting was perfect, not just accurate, but preternaturally precise, as if she had known exactly where every component of the enemy system was located before she'd even begun her approach. The computers calculated that what you accomplished in that 90-second engagement should have taken at least 4 separate attack runs by different aircraft to achieve the same level of destruction, Hayes explained. You were processing tactical information at a rate that exceeds normal human cognitive capacity by several orders of magnitude. Rodriguez shook his head in amazement. No wonder you never responded to our radio calls in Syria. You weren't just flying one mission. You were simultaneously managing 2 complete tactical situations on opposite sides of the world. The implications were staggering. Maria realized that for 3 years, she had been unknowingly serving as a prototype for a new kind of warfare, one where consciousness itself could be weaponized and deployed across vast distances. The military had been studying her not just as a pilot, but as proof of concept for technologies that could fundamentally alter the nature of human conflict. The quantum entanglement is breaking down, Hayes continued, his voice taking on a more urgent tone. Our medical teams have been monitoring the neural pathways that were established during the original procedure. They're degrading, slowly but steadily. Within 6 months, maybe less, the connection will be completely severed. You'll retain your enhanced cognitive abilities, but the quantum link to your alternate consciousness will be gone forever. And then, what happens to me? Maria asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. That depends entirely on what you choose to do with the information you now possess, Hayes replied. You know about Project Looking Glass, about quantum consciousness integration, about capabilities that officially don't exist. You've been witness to classified operations that could compromise national security if they were ever revealed. The easy solution would be to retire you quietly, provide you with a comfortable pension and a non-disclosure agreement backed by the full weight of federal law. Morrison's expression hardened. Or we recognize that Captain Vasquez represents something unique in military history, Hayes said. A pilot who has literally transcended the normal limitations of human consciousness, who has served her country in ways that defy conventional understanding. She could help us develop training protocols for future quantum-linked pilots, could serve as an instructor for technologies that won't be declassified for decades. Maria felt the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. She could walk away, return to a normal life with the knowledge that she had served her country in ways that would never be publicly acknowledged. Or she could embrace what she had become, help develop capabilities that could save countless lives in future conflicts. There's a third option, she said quietly, surprising everyone, including herself. You said the quantum link is breaking down, that I'll lose my connection to the alternate consciousness. But what if we don't let it break down? What if we find a way to stabilize it, to make it permanent? The silence that followed her suggestion was deafening. Hayes stared at her with something approaching horror. Captain, you're talking about fundamentally altering human consciousness on a permanent basis. The risks are completely unknown. You could lose yourself entirely, become something that's no longer recognizably human. Or I could become something better, Maria replied. Something that could prevent other pilots from having to die in places like Syria. Something that could end wars before they start by providing intelligence and tactical capabilities that our enemies can't match. Morrison exchanged a long look with Rodriguez, both men clearly struggling with the implications of what they were hearing. Finally, Morrison spoke. The woman who saved my squadron was willing to die for people she'd never met. I guess it makes sense that she'd be willing to risk everything to save people she'll never meet in the future. Hayes closed his tablet with a sharp snap. This conversation is way above my security clearance level. If you're serious about exploring that option, Captain Vasquez, will need to involve people with authority I don't possess. People who make decisions about the future of American military capability. Then call them, Maria said simply. Because for the first time in 3 years, I know exactly who I am and what I want to do with my life. The desert wind picked up around them, swirling dust and sand in small cyclones that danced across the tarmac. Maria looked up at the sky, seeing it with eyes that were beginning to understand their true capabilities. Somewhere up there, in dimensions she was only beginning to perceive, other versions of herself might be flying other missions, saving other lives, serving a purpose that transcended the normal boundaries of human existence. She had been given a gift that defied understanding, a capability that could reshape the nature of warfare itself. The question wasn't whether she was still human. The question was whether humanity was ready for what she could become. As Hayes reached for his satellite phone to contact his superiors, Maria realized that the real test was just beginning. Not a test of her flying abilities or her tactical awareness, but a test of whether she could remain true to her values while embracing powers that placed her beyond the normal limits of human experience. The ghost was about to become something more than legend. The question was whether the world was ready for what came next. 3 hours later, Maria found herself in an underground briefing room that felt more like a corporate boardroom than military facility. The temperature was perfectly controlled, the lighting soft and indirect, the furnishings expensive enough to belong in a Pentagon executive suite. But the men and women seated around the polished conference table were clearly not corporate executives. Their bearing, their posture, the way they studied classified documents with the intensity of people accustomed to making decisions that shaped global events. These were the people who controlled America's most sensitive military programs. General Patricia Blackwood, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, sat at the head of the table with the kind of commanding presence that made everyone else in the room seem smaller by comparison. She was a woman in her late 50s with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, her uniform decorated with ribbons that told the story of a career spent in the most dangerous places on Earth. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had never had to repeat an order. Captain Vasquez, she began, I've read your service record, both the official version and the classified addendum that details your involvement in Project Looking Glass. I've also reviewed the after-action reports from Operation Desert Falcon and the medical files documenting your quantum consciousness integration. What I want to know is whether you truly understand what you're proposing. Maria met the general's gaze steadily. I'm proposing that we stop treating quantum consciousness integration as an accident and start developing it as a strategic capability. I've spent 3 years proving that it works, that it can save lives and win battles in ways that conventional warfare can't match. The question isn't whether I understand what I'm proposing. It's whether the military is ready to embrace what I've already become. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the lead scientist from Project Looking Glass, leaned forward in her chair. She was younger than Maria had expected, probably in her early 40s, with the intense focus of someone who had spent her career pushing the boundaries of theoretical physics. The risks are enormous, Captain. We're talking about permanent alterations to your neural structure, changes that could affect everything from your personality to your basic humanity. Once we stabilize the quantum link, there's no going back. There's already no going back, Maria replied. I've been living with quantum consciousness integration for 3 years. I've experienced death and somehow survived it. I carry memories of missions that officially never happened and people I've never met but whose lives I've saved. I'm already not the same person who volunteered for Project Looking Glass. Admiral James Turner, Director of Naval Intelligence, consulted a thick folder of documents before speaking. The strategic implications are significant. If we can develop stable quantum-linked pilots, we could fundamentally alter the balance of power in any regional conflict. One pilot could theoretically operate multiple aircraft simultaneously, could provide real-time intelligence from hostile territory without risking American lives. But the ethical implications are equally significant, interjected Dr. Marcus Thompson, the program's chief psychologist. We're talking about creating human beings who exist partially outside normal space and time. What happens to their identity, their relationships, their connection to the rest of humanity? Captain Vasquez has been relatively isolated for the past 3 years, but what happens when quantum-linked individuals try to reintegrate with normal society? Maria considered the question carefully before responding. I think you're looking at this backwards, Doctor. The question isn't what happens when quantum-linked individuals try to reintegrate with normal society. The question is what happens to society when it has to adapt to the existence of quantum-linked individuals. Change is coming whether we embrace it or not. The only choice is whether America leads that change or gets left behind by it. General Blackwood tapped her pen against the conference table, a rhythmic sound that seemed to punctuate her thoughts. The President has been briefed. On your situation, Captain, he's authorized me to offer you 3 options. First, you can accept medical retirement with full benefits and a substantial compensation package for your service to programs that will remain classified indefinitely. You would be required to maintain absolute secrecy about your experiences, but you would be free to live a normal civilian life. Maria nodded, understanding that this was probably the safest option for everyone involved. And the second option? You continue serving in your current capacity, the general continued. We would provide you with the medical support necessary to manage the degradation of your quantum consciousness integration, and you would serve as an instructor and consultant for future developments in consciousness-based warfare. Your experience would be invaluable for training the next generation of enhanced pilots. Which brings us to the third option, Dr. Warren said, her voice carrying a mixture of excitement and apprehension. We attempt to stabilize and enhance your quantum consciousness integration. Make it permanent, expand its capabilities, turn you into something that has never existed before in human history. You would become the prototype for a new kind of human being, one capable of existing and operating across multiple dimensions of space and time simultaneously. The room fell silent as Maria considered her options. She thought about Morrison and Rodriguez, about the squadron she had saved without even knowing it, about the countless other pilots who might face similar situations in the future. She thought about her parents, who had mourned a daughter who wasn't really dead, and about the life she could have if she chose to walk away from all of this. But mostly she thought about the moment in the Syrian desert when she had made the choice to stay and fight, to risk everything to save people she had never met. That decision had defined who she was, and created the quantum-linked consciousness that now struggled with this new choice. And deep down, she knew there was really only one option she could live with. I choose the third option, she said quietly. But I have conditions. General Blackwood raised an eyebrow. You're hardly in a position to negotiate, Captain. With Respect. General, I'm in a unique position to negotiate. I'm the only person in the world who has successfully integrated quantum consciousness technology. Without my cooperation, your entire program is dead in the water. So yes, I have conditions, and they're non-negotiable. The general's expression didn't change, but Maria caught a hint of approval in her eyes. Let's hear them. First, Colonel, Morrison and Captain Rodriguez are to be read into the program at the highest level. They saved my life by intercepting me today, and they deserve to know the full truth about what they've been part of. Second, I want regular contact with my family. I won't disappear into some black program where I'm treated like a laboratory specimen instead of a human being. Third, I want input into how this technology is developed and deployed. I've been living with quantum consciousness integration longer than anyone, and my experience should guide future developments. Dr. Warren was taking notes rapidly. Those seem like reasonable requests. But there's something else you need to understand, Captain. If we proceed with stabilizing your quantum integration, you won't just be enhanced. You'll be transformed. You'll retain your human consciousness, your memories, your personality, but you'll also become something new, something that can exist across multiple realities simultaneously, that can process information at speeds that exceed normal human capacity, that can literally be in multiple places at once. I understand, Maria said, and I accept those consequences. Because the alternative is letting this technology die with me. And that means pilots like Morrison and Rodriguez will continue to face impossible situations without the support they need to survive. General Blackwood stood, her decision made. Very well, Captain Vasquez. Welcome to the future of American military capability. Dr. Warren will brief you on the stabilization procedure, and we'll begin immediately. God help us all if we're making the right choice. As the meeting broke up and the various officials filed out of the room, Maria felt a strange sense of peace settling over her. She had made her choice, accepted her transformation, embraced her role as something new in human history. The quantum consciousness that had been fragmenting for 3 years would soon be stabilized and enhanced, turning her into a permanent bridge between the human and the posthuman. She thought about the pilot she had saved in Syria, about the one she would save in the future, about the wars that might be prevented by the capabilities she was about to fully embrace. It was a heavy responsibility, but it was one she was uniquely qualified to carry. Dr. Warren approached her as the room emptied. Captain, I want you to know that what you're doing is incredibly brave. You're volunteering to become something that has never existed before, accepting risks that we can't fully calculate. But you're also potentially saving thousands of lives and changing the course of human history. Maria smiled, feeling more certain of her choice with each passing moment. Doctor, I've been living as something that has never existed before for 3 years. The only difference now is that I'm choosing to embrace it fully instead of fighting against it. As they walked toward the medical facility where the stabilization procedure would take place, Maria felt the fragments of her quantum consciousness beginning to align, preparing for the transformation that would make her permanently something more than human. The ghost was about to become legend, and legend was about to become reality. The war she couldn't remember was finally ending, but the battle for the future of human consciousness was just beginning. 6 months later, Captain Maria Vasquez stood on the observation deck of a facility that officially didn't exist, watching the sun set over the Nevada desert. The stabilization procedure had been successful beyond anyone's expectations. Her quantum consciousness integration was now permanent and enhanced, allowing her to exist simultaneously across multiple dimensions of space and time. She could project her awareness to any location on Earth, could operate multiple aircraft simultaneously, could process tactical information at speeds that defied conventional understanding of human cognitive capacity. But more importantly, she was still herself. Still the pilot who had chosen to risk everything to save strangers in a Syrian desert. Still the woman who valued loyalty and courage above personal safety. Still the warrior who understood that true strength came from protecting others rather than dominating them. The training program she had helped develop was producing its first graduates, pilots who had undergone modified versions of the quantum consciousness integration procedure, though none had achieved the full capabilities that Maria possessed. They called themselves the Ghost Squadron, and their existence was known only to a handful of people with the highest security clearances in the American government. Morrison and Rodriguez had both volunteered for the program, despite the risks involved. The colonel now served as the Ghost Squadron's commanding officer, while Rodriguez had become Maria's primary liaison with conventional forces. Both men had adapted to their enhanced capabilities with the same professionalism they had shown throughout their careers, though Maria knew the transformation hadn't been easy for either of them. Her family had been told that she was serving in a highly classified special operations unit, which was true enough without revealing the full extent of her transformation. She visited them regularly, though they never knew that sometimes the Maria who shared dinner with them was a quantum projection, while her physical body was conducting operations on the other side of the world. The moral implications of her existence were complex and troubling. She was no longer entirely human, yet she remained deeply committed to human values and human welfare. She could be in multiple places simultaneously, yet she remained anchored by relationships and loyalties that transcended her enhanced capabilities. She had become something new in human history, yet she used her abilities to preserve and protect the very humanity she had partially transcended. Dr. Warren's research had expanded beyond military applications. The quantum consciousness integration technology was being studied for potential medical uses, treating traumatic brain injuries, helping stroke victims regain lost functions, even exploring the possibility of backing up human consciousness as a form of digital immortality. But all of those applications remained years in the future, dependent on understanding gained from studying Maria's unique neural patterns. The geopolitical implications were already becoming apparent. America's enemies had no idea that quantum-linked pilots existed, but they were beginning to encounter situations where their forces were defeated by tactics and capabilities that seemed impossible. Aircraft appeared where satellites showed empty sky. Intelligence operations were disrupted by information that couldn't have been obtained through conventional means, and strategic plans were countered by responses that suggested an almost supernatural level of tactical awareness. Maria turned away from the sunset and walked back into the facility, her footsteps echoing in corridors that bustled with activity day and night. Scientists, technicians, military personnel, and intelligence analysts worked around the clock to expand and refine the capabilities she had helped pioneer. They were building the future of American military power, one quantum breakthrough at a time. In her private quarters, Maria sat down at her desk and began writing her daily report. It was a routine she had maintained since the stabilization procedure, documenting her experiences and observations for future researchers. But tonight she found herself writing something different, a letter to the version of herself that had died in the Syrian desert 3 years ago. "I want you to know that your sacrifice wasn't in vain," she wrote. "The men you saved have become some of my closest friends and most trusted colleagues. The technology that killed you has been refined and improved, turned into something that can save countless lives without requiring the ultimate sacrifice. You gave up your existence so that others could live, and now I use the capabilities that cost you everything to ensure that other pilots won't have to make the same choice." She paused, thinking about the quantum twin who had experienced death while she had continued living. In some ways, she was writing to herself, to the part of her consciousness that had been destroyed when the Syrian warthog had been shot down. In other ways, she was writing to a separate person entirely, someone who had shared her identity but experienced a completely different fate. The program you helped create is expanding, she continued. We're training new pilots, developing new capabilities, preparing for conflicts that haven't happened yet but probably will. Your death taught us that quantum consciousness integration could work, but it also taught us that it needed to be safer, more stable, more sustainable. Every pilot who enters the program now has a much better chance of surviving because of what we learned from losing you. Maria sealed the letter in an envelope and placed it in a locked drawer with dozens of others she had written over the past 6 months. She knew no one would ever read them, that they were really just a form of therapy to help her process the complex grief of mourning a version of herself that had died to save strangers. But the ritual brought her comfort, helped her maintain connection to the humanity she had partially transcended. Her quantum consciousness detected an incoming priority alert from the operations center. Somewhere in the world, American forces were in trouble, facing a situation that required capabilities only she could provide. Maria closed her eyes and felt her awareness expand, reaching across thousands of miles to assess the threat and plan a response. In the space of a heartbeat, she was simultaneously in Nevada and in a war zone halfway around the world, her consciousness operating in multiple dimensions of reality while her enhanced tactical awareness processed information at superhuman speeds. She was no longer entirely human, but she remained utterly committed to protecting human life and preserving human freedom. The legend of the ghost had taken on a life of its own, whispered about in military circles around the world. Pilots told stories of impossible rescues, of enemy forces defeated by tactics that defied explanation, of guardian angels that appeared from nowhere to turn the tide of hopeless battles. Most of the stories were exaggerated, some were completely fictional, but all of them were rooted in the reality of what Maria had become. She was a living bridge between the human and the posthuman, a warrior who had literally transcended death to continue serving her country, a legend that would inspire future generations of pilots long after the technology that created her had become commonplace. The war that had killed and transformed her was over, but her service to humanity would continue for as long as consciousness itself existed. In the end, that was perhaps the most fitting tribute to the pilot who had died in a Syrian desert. Not a monument or a medal, but a living commitment to ensuring that her sacrifice would never be forgotten and never need to be repeated. The ghost would fly on, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, until the day came when war itself became obsolete. But until that day, Maria Vasquez would remain on guard, a quantum sentinel watching over a world that would never fully understand what she had given up to keep it safe. Her tail number, AF 810965, would continue to appear in impossible places, saving lives and changing the course of battles in ways that would never be officially acknowledged. The ghost bird had become something more than legend. She had become a promise that no American pilot would ever have to die alone, that no squadron would ever face impossible odds without hope of rescue, that somewhere in the quantum foam between realities, a guardian angel was always watching. Morrison and Rodriguez knew the truth, as did the handful of officials who made decisions about America's most classified capabilities. But for the rest of the world, Maria Vasquez remained what she had always been, a ghost story whispered in ready rooms and briefing halls, a legend that grew with each impossible rescue and each tactical miracle that defied explanation. And that was exactly how she wanted it. The dead pilot who had saved a squadron in Syria had become a living symbol of sacrifice and service, a quantum warrior who existed in the spaces between realities to protect the reality that mattered most, the one where American pilots came. home alive. The war was over, but the legend would live forever. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.